Carlisle.
Hello.
Have a seat. This is not the first time that we've been on this stage together talking about opera. But once again, Carlisle Floyd has a standing room only audience, and it's just nice to see that the record continues.
Thank you.
How wonderful to hear a couple of excerpts from your next opera, which we're delighted about. But it's an opera that departs quite a lot from the Carlisle Floyd norm, and I wanted to chat a little bit about some of those differences. It's for chamber orchestra. It is a somewhat smaller scale piece.
Yes.
And we've been talking a lot in the New Works Forum about the scale of new works and the variety of big works and small works and the appropriateness for the subject matter. How did you decide that this opera is going to be a chamber opera?
Well, it seemed to me very intimate. The relationship between the characters just struck me is that what happened actually between the players and the characters was with the exception of the scene with Charles II, which is quite declamatory, that they were almost intimate scenes, and in some cases were, as you just saw on the stage. And so it just was, it took very little prodding on my part to think of it as a chamber opera. Of course, yes, I've still got to do a chamber orchestration. So that's my next big undertaking.
So you don't know yet whether you're going to miss all of those instruments you would otherwise have.
I know I'm going to miss them. Absolutely. But I'm prepared for the challenge of creating new sounds, and I think I've written the opera in much finer textures. So in other words, I was not unmindful as I was composing that I was going to have to think of working in a smaller orchestra of 25.
Mm-hmm. So 25 is the orchestra.
25
is there any chorus?
Well, it's the maximum also for the orchestra pit in Houston.
In the Cullen, it's going to be in the Cullen?
For the second theater there.
And is there any chorus in the opera?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a chorus that binds the opera from beginning to end, and is the response in the end of the first scene to and establishes Kinnistons' absolute adoration by the London crowds, in which once he finishes his scene, it's the one they want to see. They don't care about singing any more Othello. They simply call for Keniston's return. So it establishes that, plus the fact that is actually true, he was an idol of his time. And the famous British diarist, there we go. My mind went out. Pepys, Samuel Pepys, wrote about Kynaston that he was the most beautiful woman in London and also the handsomest man.
Now, how did you find this material? I know you're a big reader. You always have in your whole life a big reader. How did this material come to you?
This came through a film I saw, a film called The Complete Female
Stage Beauty.
Yes. And it's a British movie that's been seen, I think, a great deal on television. If my television is any indication, it's very well done, brilliantly done in British style, and it struck me as being the first thing I had seen in some time that I felt really had operatic potential for what I wanted to do.
So how far into it did you say to yourself, this could be an opera? Did it strike you immediately, or did you sort of have to just watch it for a while before the idea congealed?
I think I saw it, and then the idea, I can tell you specifically what happened. Afterwards, I thought, well, this is operatic material, because the one thing it has that is absolutely crucial to a good operatic libretti is a sense of anxiousness and anxiety and crisis. That's the operatic word.
And you said it in the video. You said that crisis at the center is at the center of all good operas, and I wanted to ask you about
Yes.
that. So this had a sense of crisis. And
Well, it was a very obvious crisis. What happens to this man at the peak of his career, in which his career is really taken from him by the king, and he, being committed to playing women's roles, refuses to do male roles, and that's what the opera is about. Is his personal grappling with the idea of changing everything that has made his professional life successful.
has crisis been at the center of all of your operas? Does crisis apply also to Cold Sassy Tree?
Yes, I think it does. In Cold Sassy Tree, the crisis is the marriage of the two leads, which provokes all kind of comment. It's the element in an opera that triggers your action and triggers what happens after the presentation of the crisis. But it's the thing that gives the opera what it absolutely has to have, and that is that it's not an everyday affair. Everything in opera is that special day that something happened. And this, I felt, had that element very strongly.
You are your own librettist again for this opera?
Yes.
And how did you, is it original text entirely? Did you derive any of the text from?
No, actually, it's a play. Initially, it was before it was a film. And the play has the same name, The Complete Female Beauty, Stage Beauty. And the playwright has been cooperative, very cooperative with me. I was afraid that he would want to have, a very stringent approval clause, and I think he was just intrigued. And he says the idea of making a libretto is, as he put it, was just amazing to him, because I sent him with what I initially had sketched out, and of course he was committed to his play. But I think he saw what I saw in it. At least he certainly never objected.
Have you met him?
No, I haven't. I've been on the phone with him, but we've never met. But I hope he will be around in about a year or so.
And did he read various versions of the libretto or just the initial scenario?
No, he read the first libretto completed.
Completely?
Yes.
Well, so he must have had to learn a lot about opera, or you had to teach once again about opera so he'd come to understand what you needed to do.
Well, I tried to make that very clear when I first started corresponding with him. His name is Jeffrey Hatcher, by the way, and he's been a very, very good person to collaborate with.
In terms of your creative process, it's now been 6 decades that you've been writing operas. And
Makes me tired.
well, it makes us joyful that you've been at it so long. Has your creative process changed any in all of these years and all of the operas that you've composed?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I recently happened to have a conversation with a very good friend of mine and a colleague of mine, and that's Jake. Jake Heggie in San Francisco. And it seems to me when we get together, all we do is commiserate about how tough it is. And he wrote me the other day, he says, I just hate it. And you get to that point because this is very difficult stuff. It's very difficult going. And some days you don't, things don't open for you. The inner ear doesn't speak as clearly as others. And that's when you have to bring into play everything you know about opera and about its being and in what way it's a function of the inner ear. And also, Verdi's wonderful injunction and that he always demanded of his librettist, tell me what la tinta is of the scene, the color of the scene. Because as soon as you know that, and the color of the scene is defined by you, it gives you your entree into tempo and to texture, everything. And it's not a trick. It's simply the basis of what you do as a composer in terms of constructing dramatic scenes.
Do you complete the libretto first before you start composing?
Yes.
So that when you are working on a scene, do you think about what color does this scene have? Do you know the libretto is done when each scene has a color you can talk about?
Yes. And I know that if I'm stuck, it's because I haven't really established the color of the scene. Because as soon as you get the color of the scene, you get the tempo of the scene. You get the texture of the scene. And the aria, for instance, that you all just heard from the soprano who did the solo aria, I remember thinking I was very stuck at one point, and I came back to it 2 days later, and it turned out to be exactly what I wanted. But 2 days before, it seemed just hopeless. So those are the days that you hate composing. You know.
We've been chatting in the New Works Forum. I've been listening to Composer Talk, and it's clear that you you compose at the piano, so that you are then going to orchestrate.
Yes.
And I was listening over dinner last night to a couple of composers who compose in full score and then have the unhappy task of creating a piano reduction from it. So you go from piano to full score. But even as you're at the keyboard, do you understand the instruments? Are you in your mind orchestrating it at the same time?
I think, let's say, if you stopped me at any given moment, I could probably tell you what the instrumentation would be. So it's a little of that. I mean, it's more of that than anything else. It's just that I don't think in terms of, well, I do too. You know, that's not true. I think in terms of orchestral color and in terms of balance and textures, all the things you have to keep foremost in your mind.
In terms of workshops, you've had a couple of workshops already of the opera?
One.
Did you do any workshops for Susanna? Did you have workshops for Susanna?
Nobody ever heard of it.
Do you like having workshops?
I find them absolutely indispensable. Okay. But I've had a number of young composers who have had workshops done of their operas, and they didn't know how to use them at all. They were simply carried away at hearing their piece, you know, come to life on the stage for the first time. So they simply parked their critical faculties entirely. And simply got around to really seeing what might be wrong with it later.
So how do you use a workshop?
To me, I see the first thing I look for, I was just see, does it move? Is there an arc from beginning to end? I was brought up in the 1950s and 40s, in the days of the well-made plays, and I still very much subscribe to that. I don't think everybody has to, but it's certainly a very good way to create a tight structure, which is to first of all come up with your through line. One of the things I say with young composers with me, I will say, well, tell me in 25 words what your opera is all about. Well, 5 minutes later, I stopped them. I said 25 words. And I realized that when I redid Of Mice and Men, for instance, the second time, I thought simply shut myself up in my studio, and I said, now what is this opera really all about? And I thought, it's a suspense story. It can very easily be summed up in about 6 or 8 words. Can George keep Lenny out of trouble until they realize their dream? And that's the story. And everything that comes from that is derived from that. But that gives you all kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? It propels you into the story, because then I made it so that they were fleeing the police in the first scene, the opening of the opera. And I don't know that I would have thought of that otherwise.
Can you tell us what Kynaston is about?
Well, yeah, I think as much as anything else, it's about a man who finds a much more complete self. Both sexually, since he's homosexual, and then he has this relationship finally, very quickly. I shouldn't say quickly, it's rather protracted, as a matter of fact. But he discovers his capacity for having feelings for a woman, very strong feelings, and it enriches him. At the end of when she says, "What's happened to you?" because he takes up men's roles for the first time and is brilliantly successful at them, because, I mean, of her saying to him, as you heard today, that if I were a woman, I would not let, I would fight to the end before I would give up and die beautifully. Mm-hmm. He had adopted all of his life as a performer the idea of the beautiful, beautiful death. The movie opens with his dying, and there's a close-up on his finger so that you see the hand. It's absolutely a beautiful image. Has absolutely nothing to do with dying, though. It's just a very beautiful idea of death and how this is reflected physically. So it's he by the end of the opera has said basically goodbye to that, and has discovered a much more aggressive self that he can express on the stage.
Do you, not having the dynamic tension with a librettist, you don't have a...
That's what you call it, huh?
That's
a good word for it.
You don't have a Ghislanzoni to harass until
That's
he
right.
gets work. The correspondence between Verdi and Ghislanzoni around Aida is an 800-page book, so you don't have that correspondence.
Not to mention Strauss and his guy. Huh?
For sure. Is there a stage director assigned to the piece yet? Who do you talk to about the piece?
Well, he's sitting down here on the front row. It's Michael Gioletta, who was introduced to me by Patrick. Mm-hmm. And we've gotten to be very good and great friends, and have been working on the piece together to polish it and to bring it to the best possible fruition. He's been to see me at my home in Tallahassee, and I think twice now, and we've kept a pretty close communication. Mm-hmm. And also, I've worked with Patrick and will continue to.
Will there be orchestral workshops?
Probably not, because I probably won't finish the orchestration in time.
Forewarned is forearmed.
Patrick, that's not to strike fear in your heart.
Well, it is so wonderful to hear of another Carlisle Floyd opera, and that we get to speak with you about it. I know there are going to be questions from some of our colleagues in the audience, so let me turn to the audience for a couple of questions. And
great.
I can't see anyone because
we're right
of the
in the light.
spotlights, but I see Laura Lee is there with a microphone. This is being live streamed, so that way people on the live stream can hear the questions. Questions?
Oh,
there we go. Thank you. Questions for Carlisle? Yes, Conrad.
I can't resist. Tell us about the sex scenes.
Oh, there's always someone in the room who wants to know about the sex scenes.
I think I've doomed myself. There's this a sex scene, so-called, that sort of cheapened it somehow, but between him and his male lover, who was the Duke of Buckingham. And that's been pretty much authorized by at least historians that I've read during his time. And it's a brief scene, and it's nothing more than establishing what their relationship is. But it's a very real love relationship ended by the Duke. And then the latter sex scene is the one that you saw begun today, in which his anger is incited, as you heard on the stage today, by Margaret, or Peg as we call her, and to the point that it arouses him sexually. He, as you heard today, he says, "What's wrong with my playing of this scene that he's never been satisfied with?" And she says, basically, "It's too beautiful." And he says, but that, then he tries to represent women as very weak and beautifully pale characters. And she says, "That's not women, that's your fantasy," which is what you heard today. And all of this provokes anger on both sides, which ends up in their going to bed. Not certainly seen in advance by either one of them. It comes out of their relationship and the friction that's caused by this disagreement over simply playing, how do you play a scene? And this is the key to the opera because it ends with the death scene of Desdemona as it begins with the death scene of Desdemona. But it has a different Othello, and that Othello is Kynaston, who starts off by playing Desdemona.
How fascinating. There is so much new work being created now.
Isn't there? Yes.
We have to admit, and no one has seen it more than you have, Carlyle, that the creation of American opera is continuing with excitement, diversity, range of expression, subject matter, range in scope and scale. How do you react to the American opera scene today? Are you encouraged by what you hear and see?
Oh, I think it's great. I think it's wonderful. All that competition out there. Huh? No, because when I began, really, there was one other composer beside me who was doing American opera. That was Douglas Moore. Yeah. And then Menotti came on the scene doing a different kind of opera, really, for Broadway. But it simply, I think, excited American composers to begin to want to do their own native works rather than works that were much more European in their origins. But it was a very thin scene, and you have to realize there were only 3 major opera companies, which I had when my opera Susanna was done. And there was the Met, which was completely European. There was San Francisco, who was not very far back. And then there was the New York City Opera that was the only one to do new opera, a major company. And fortunately, they took Susanna. But we didn't have the stages that we have today. And so what kept Susanna alive for probably 10 or 15 years before some of these companies began to be established was the simple fact that colleges took it over. It was very much considered something that could be done in your bigger music schools. And that kept it very much alive.
When you hear new work today, some of it is narrative, some of it is non-narrative. There are extended vocal techniques. So it's just a range of creativity. What makes an opera successful in your estimation? What does an opera have to have that makes it speak to you?
He doesn't know how to ask a simple question, does he? I think for me, an emotional followed by an intellectual response. I want to be engaged. I think an audience goes to the theater to want to be engaged. And I've felt since I began my long journey in opera that if we could present the American audience with opera that had the same kind of dramatic excitement and interest that we had in the theater and in the movies, that we could tap a much larger audience. And I think that's exactly what did happen, and certainly with the advent of super titles, that took away the final barrier, really. But I think the audience responds to being engaged and moved if it's a serious work.
Other questions for Carlyle? Any hands going once? Well, Carlisle, you do us such an honor to be here today. It is always a pleasure to see you, and I know I get to see more of you tomorrow, too. We are going to have a reception at 6 o'clock, or just as soon as this is over. Are they ready? They're almost ready. They're almost ready. So walk slowly for your liquor. And over in the rehearsal hall, we wish you such success with the orchestration. We wish Houston Grand Opera a triumph with the premiere. As many of us as can fit into that theater will be there to applaud our good friend, the loving, lovely Carlisle Thornton. Thank you so much. Thank you.